Right now I want to talk a little bit about the term dynamic. You know, when we introduce and develop dynamics in an ensemble or with our soloists, we immediately think of the concept of volume. You know, kids know typically that dynamics are forte, piano, pianissimo, fortissimo. But I encourage my students to think about dynamic, the word dynamic, more in the scientific form. What do they learn about that term dynamic in science class? What they learn is the definition of dynamic is when something is in constant motion, it's dynamic. And I always encourage my students also to think about what is the opposite of dynamic, and of course that is static. So how can we make everything we play dynamic? And how can we identify the parts in our passages in an orchestra that are dynamic versus static? So these terms become a big part of the vocabulary of the orchestra rehearsal. Just a little example of a way that you can use that concept of something being dynamic. We can take a note from being static to dynamic by adding vibrato. Static, dynamic. So now the note that is at its core seems very static is dynamic by adding vibrato or varying the speed of the vibrato. You can incorporate this idea all through the repertoire, and I encourage you to think of ways that you can use the terms dynamic versus static in your private studio lessons and in the ensemble rehearsal.